on the basis of the right to contract.
Okay.
In California, there's the California State Agricultural Relations Act, which amounts to enabling legislation, and is apart from the National Labor Relations Act, which excludes agricultural workers, that gives them the right to bargain.
Okay. Okay. So it's just guaranteeing that the employer has to recognize the collective bargaining efforts of the employers. Or
it doesn't have to. It's a type of voluntary recognition.
I see. I see. Okay.
And if you've got enough power, you can enforce that.
Okay. I see. So, and multiple people, I mean, you know, this is mostly people from AFSCME and the police and fire unions have emphasized the 1979 Toledo strikes as being the impetus. I mean, in their, you know, in their words, it was the impetus for the 1983 collective bargaining law. So I'm curious to hear from your perspective how that, you know, plays into the formation of Ohio's current collective bargaining law.
I think it's all part of that stream that's going on, that's moving, okay, in terms of interest in public sector unionism. The Toledo strike, why does it occur?
I'm sorry?
Why did that occur? I'm just asking, what did they tell you why that occurred?
They told, I mean, so I'm still going through the news articles, but what I was told is that there was a disagreement over contracting for first responders in Toledo.
Yeah, there was part of that, but it was in general, if there was no legislation, and the employer didn't want to bargain with them,
right.
The only thing you could do was strike, and there were no laws against public sector strikes. Okay, but it usually just didn't happen. But what you got in the Senate bill, or in 1983, was a law that included no strike provisions and was based largely on the National Labor Relations Act, with a few minor changes from it.
And is that part of
So I think that the strike then has a couple different influences. One, it shows the power of labor unions, but then it also says to public sector employers, we have to have the right, or we have to have a legislation that does not allow public sector strikes unless you go through this mediation process that's also contained in the Act itself, that includes fact finding, that includes final offer arbitration, and even you have it says you have to have 50% of the total people in the bargaining unit, which is very difficult to meet in terms of voting for a contract.
Right, and I understand this is part of the first responders union's emphasis on binding arbitration, because it provides a system of dealing with a sort of standstill between management and workers.
Yeah, it does, but it's also, you have to remember that the public sector is different from the private sector in that there are usually not any alternatives. If there's a strike in the private sector, customers can go to different businesses to get the services or products that they're getting. But when you're dealing with the public sector union, there's no other first responders. And that's the reason why that the legislation in 1983 was such that it provided for this mandatory dispute settlement procedure that basically made it very difficult to strike.
Right.
Not impossible. They happened. But it happens, but it was very, very much impossible.
Okay.
Not very likely.
Right. Okay, that's really helpful. And then so the second line, I'm just making sure that I've understood everything you're telling me, is in fact, the rise of Reagan and neoliberalism. I mean, obviously first in the Republican Party, but then the well-documented story of the rise of the New Democrats under Clinton and the actual enactment of neoliberalism with NAFTA and other
absolutely, that's right.
reforms.
They became Republican-like.
Mm. And essentially what you're suggesting is that this had the effect of disarticulating working class constituencies in Ohio as the labor movement was not punishing Democrats for enactment of things like NAFTA that ultimately hurt working class constituencies in industrialized areas.
I think that's true, and also the general weakening of the labor movement itself is very much part of that.
Right. So this is something that I have looked at in Michigan. Oh, go ahead.
You can just see unions like the Steelworkers Union that were very powerful and led the Ohio labor movement for half a century, where became just incredibly docile and weak, and because of what was going on in their industry and outsourcing and globalization and everything else and automation and all those things are all weakening the unions themselves. So you can't sort of, when you lose the political power that you had in the 1970s to drive through enabling legislation in the 1980s, then you lose that power, the conservative forces are going to rise again. Mm-hmm. Plus, there's just general disenchantment among working people what was going on in the public sector. I mean, for a long time, when I started teaching, look, in 1968 and 69, I was going to college at Michigan State. Mm-hmm. I worked at night on the assembly line in Oldsmobile. Mm-hmm. I was an auto worker at the time. It's one of the proudest things in my D-Day. I was an auto worker. It helps my credits, as they say around here.
Yes.
But when I started teaching, I took a pay cut. Okay? And the line was always that, over time, in the auto industry, you could get, 30 and out and have a good pension. You did mundane, terrible work, and it was, very frustrating, of course. And even though that I taught for 9 months a year and was at the public school, then a college professor, I was making less, but there were sort of other benefits. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But when you get to a later period, after the concessionary bargaining in the private sector and the deindustrialization and the economic restructuring, when then suddenly the wages and benefits of public sector employees rose to roughly equivalent, and sometimes a little bit more than that was going on in the private sector, there was a lot of people that were complaining about that we should somehow sacrifice just like what was going on in the other industry. Mm. So it was easy to sort of do that, because one of the, if you're not a bargaining theorist or anything like that, but I'll just say one of the most dominant ideas in bargaining is the principle of comparability. We always make comparisons, and so it works the same way in the public sector. When you compare what was going on between private sector workers and what was happening in their communities, the austerity that would soon be upon them within these communities, both because of deindustrialization and later because of programs by the state. There was a lot of anger toward public sector unions, and like I said earlier, when Senate Bill 5 came around, it was the public sector unions an opportunity to do what they should have been doing, telling them all the things that they were doing for the community all at once.
Right.
And sort of make the case that they make other people's lives easier and better and safer, and they can get to work, they can do all the things that they can do. So, you get this sort of sense that this sort of stream that was going on was a type of confluence of different factors. bottom line is, what was the driving force to get enabling legislation in the 80s? It was the power of unions themselves.
Right.
To force politicians into that particular mode. When that starts to dissipate,